And today we're taking a look at what's making headlines. And on Press Review, we've just talked about the biggest story that is predicting the beginning of the end of a wild Sonko era, as the Daily Nation is putting it. So, I mean, my question earlier on to Ms. Wanjiru Gikonyo was that, is it justified that the national government is unwilling to have Nairobi as a devolved government on its own? I would feel that it should be part of the national, government, because of the hope that they would deliver services better than, what is happening right now. But then, is it a question of revenue? I would love your input on that.
Sorry, Trick. You have to throw that question one more time.
Do you feel that the national government is, justified in their unwillingness to have Nairobi as a separate, devolved, government? Or is it, is it an issue of revenue? They just want more money? Or is it that an issue that they would deliver better services to the people?
National government is struggling to implement its own functions. So let's start there.
Yeah.
In terms of their ability to deliver services to the people of Nairobi, I don't think that is really the question. It's not the question we want to ask. I think the question we need to ask is, what are the implications for the people of Nairobi? Because the purpose or the object of devolution is political. It's about political say. And the reason Kenyans pushed for devolution is so that we can have a say in terms of what the priorities are. Because under national government, the distance from a resident to the national government is way too high.
Yes.
So are Nairobians willing to give up their
power,
say?
Basically.
Yes, it is. Their sovereignty, the exercise of sovereignty. Now, devolution is imperfect.
Right.
Nairobi County has been very imperfect, and there are safeguards in the Constitution and in the law regarding what should happen. For instance, this county should have been suspended because it can be suspended, and an interim board put in place to remedy what is not working, and then there's the possibility of either reinstituting the county or going into an election.
Right.
So there are safeguards that should have been invoked. So the decision to take over services really is a disenfranchisement of the Nairobian citizens.
Yeah, but then it's the same Nairobian citizens, and at the risk of sounding elitist, who chose the current leadership that is right there, And so there's the argument that, given the magnitude of this county, perhaps they should not be given that kind of power,
If you look at it the way you're looking at it, then that argument holds water. But if you look at our constitution, it actually allows for transfer of functions and powers between levels of government.
Yeah.
The county government is a government, the national government is a government.
But guys, the question that Trix is raising, though, is it justified to have that conversation of transferring the entire county government of Nairobi and make it a metropolitan area of the national government? We've seen it in Nigeria.
I've gone back to the constitution because that is the structure from which you can actually derive.
It is justified.
It's true, but the discussion is amending even that provision in the constitution and saying Nairobi shall have 46 counties.
Kenya should have 46.
Rather, Kenya shall have 46 counties, and then Nairobi shall be, a metropolitan area governed by the national government.
But you see, that's a totally different discussion, really.
No, that's the discussion that Trix is raising.
Yes, and I'm saying
we've had that discussion.
I am
it's
saying
even contained in the BBI report.
There yet.
Well,
we are there.
I think we're right there, because by virtue of what's going on right now, this discussion has come up many times. And apart from the fact that the discussion is there that services in the county have ground to a halt, it has been thrown in the ring that should we then have Nairobi operate as a protectorate of sorts?
Of the national
and I'm telling you
that
our constitution allows for transfer of powers within government.
Now, this is beyond the transfer of powers. The discussion that we are raising is beyond the transfer of
now
power.
I'm saying beyond the transfer, the discussion has come into play that should it be removed permanently.
Can we,
so that we don't find ourselves
the thing is, we are mixing issues because there are two questions. Is this legal? is the first question.
Right.
The second question is this, should Nairobi County be, should the status then be changed? That's a constitutional conversation.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So
but
this
if
is
illegal, then it would lead to the constitutional
What I'm saying is we are here we need to take a position of rule of law. So even as we discuss, let us discuss within the legal framework. The only conversation we can have now is this legal or is it not legal? The other conversation, no.
Why should this be the only conversation? We can have this other conversation.
Because one would feed eventually into
we
the
had
other.
it even in 2010 when we were discussing the constitution and before we went to the referendum for that constitution, that conversation was already being raised.
Right.
Should
I'm
we
not trying
have Nairobi as a county?
I am not trying to temper freedom of speech. Yes, we can discuss that. But the actions of yesterday can only be discussed within the present legal framework. If we discuss those outside the legal framework, then what we're saying is that we entertain and accept abuse of rule of law. So the point I'm making is this. The national government has stepped in and Sonko has signed over powers. Are those powers his to sign? Is this a due process? That is the fundamental question regarding what happened yesterday. The other question, which is for us to now have a broader deliberation, which is what BBI is bringing up, is should Nairobi County be a county like others? So, if we start mixing issues, then really we are then also part of the problem in that we are not regarding the rule, the
I don't
constitution.
think it's mixing of issues, but rather there's a larger conversation.
We are discussing an issue that is already mixed.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, let's not mix it further. So what I'm saying, for us to have a coherent conversation, it's useful for us to then say, okay, is this a lawful process? And what else needs to happen within this process to ensure it upholds rule of law?
The Constitution supports you on that because it says for this transfer of powers, one of the conditions is that the transfer of the functions of power is not prohibited by the legislation under which it is to be performed or exercised. So the Constitution supports you. Now, the Constitution places the burden of ensuring that it's within the constitutional umbrella on the national government. They are the ones who should ensure. Let me read it for you. Constitutional responsibility for the performance of the function or exercise of the powers shall remain with the government to which it is assigned by the 4th schedule. Arrangements shall be put in place to ensure that resources necessary for the power performance of the function of the exercise of the powers are transferred. Now, all I'm saying is this. The Constitution gives you a clear roadmap as to how this should be done. Now, what is clear is that what is legislated about this is what, and again, as Wanjiru puts it, this is probably what we need to look at. And since I'm not a lawyer, I can only read what is written and say this is what I understand it to be. There are people who I think understand these things a lot better than we do. What the Constitution doesn't tell you, it doesn't. And this is why even when you have a constitution, you have to take it a step further for it to be actually become a functioning legal, yes.
There's in the Intergovernmental Relations Act,
yes,
those provisions are then given legislative provision.
Yes.
And the provisions that are given is that there is a provision for suspension, and there is a provision for when a county is in crisis, a special board can be set up to take over the functions. So actually, it would be important to look at if this Gazette notice has fallen into that provision. But the board being set up would then be the one to assess the situation, what has gone wrong, where are the gaps, what needs to be done, and then make recommendations to the government, to the national government. Actually, the suspension of a government, the president has a critical role in that they receive the report from the special board with regard to the steps that need to be taken. Yeah. So what has happened here is the national government has really just ignored that provision. There's also another provision where county can transfer its powers. And I think that's the provision they're working under. So where county can say, look, we can't manage this function, let us transfer it to the national government. But Then comes back the issue of process. What is the due process? And the law does lay down a process. And what they've done here is they've turned the process backwards by first signing the agreement and then saying in 14 days the National Assembly, County Assembly and citizens will have a say. That is not public participation.
We'll have this conversation again in detail between 7 a.m. and 8 a.m. and we'll be calling in some lawyers who understand matters of devolution. Peter Wanyama is one of them. He's lined up. He's going to be joining us in this conversation. So we'll be looking at it. And I'll be raising the issue and saying whatever the process, whatever everything has been done, it's undemocratic. That's what I'll be saying. What happened yesterday in State House is undemocratic. It usurps the power from the people of Nairobi County. Good morning. It's 27 minutes to 7 o'clock. This is The Situation Room, Kenya's biggest conversation, broadcasting on Spice FM and KTN News. Let's take a look at